So in the two previous videos, I told you that to either open or close the stoma, the guard cells will have to change their shapes, right? And for the guard cells to change their shapes, they will either have to gain water or lose water. The other important thing is the guard cells have this uneven cell wall thickness, so that when water goes in, the cells will expand, but they will not expand like a normal plant cell would. Okay, and this will cause the cell to increase more in length than diameter. Therefore, the cells will become larger, but in doing so, it causes the pore in the middle of the stoma to open even more. So that is what I told you earlier. However, for this lesson, we have to then look at how exactly does the water enter the cell or go out of the cell. So in this video, we're going to see how exactly all that happens. Now, we have discussed the cell wall thickness, uneven thickness, joint at the end, and now we're going to see the cell surface membrane of the guard cells. In the cell surface membrane of the guard cells, you can see the cytoplasm, cell wall. The phospholipid bilayer represents the cell surface membrane, by the way. So the guard cells, on the cell surface membrane of the guard cells, they have a few transport proteins and also receptor proteins. One is called an ABA receptor. I will talk about the ABA receptor much later, but I want you to focus on the fact that it has something called a proton pump, potassium ion channel, and also aquaporin. Now, a proton pump is just basically a transport protein that does active transport, and it's going to be actively transporting out hydrogen ions. Potassium ion channel is to carry out facilitated diffusion of potassium ions. Aquaporin is a water channel to allow water to pass through. Simple as that. And there's a relationship I would like you to remember, by the way. For the purpose of plants, when we are studying this, there is a relationship I want you to know. And the relationship here is as follows. Hydrogen ions and potassium ions hate each other. Hydrogen ions are also referred to as protons, by the way. So hydrogen ions or protons and potassium ions hate each other. They don't technically hate each other, by the way. They just repel each other. But I just want you to remember it like that. The second thing I also want you to remember is wherever potassium ion goes, water will follow. Okay, they have a relationship that way. So protons and potassium ions, they hate each other. Potassium ions and water love each other, in which if potassium ion goes in one direction, water will also follow in that same direction. So yes, I do understand your pain, all right? So I'm just going to try to make it simple. And if you can memorize this statement, it will also be important for chapter 15 when we study plant coordination, when we see how auxin actually works. So this relationship is quite good to memorize as well. So we have the guard cells on the left and we have the guard cells on the right. And the stoma here is closed and the stoma on the right side is open. And remember, to make the stoma open, what needs to happen? The water needs to enter the cells and the guard cells have to become turgid or full of water. So how does that process actually happen? The water just needs to enter. Now I'm going to put that relationship at the top over there again. Hydrogen ions and potassium ions hate each other, and wherever potassium ion goes, water follows, because this will make sense later. Okay, now remember the guard cells, it has the proton pump, potassium ion channels, and aquaporin. If you're thinking about the ABA receptor that I drew earlier, ignore it first. We will talk about that at the last part of the video. Now, so the cytoplasm, I'm just coloring it in blue because to represent the water inside the cells. Okay, now, so the first thing that needs to happen to open the stoma is proton pump actively transports out hydrogen ions. By active transport, it needs to receive ATP, by the way, because active transport requires ATP as an energy molecule. Now, remember, I told you hydrogen ions and potassium ions hate each other. And there are some potassium ions just gathered around in the cells. Now, because they hate each other, like I said, this will cause the potassium ions to move in the opposite direction because the potassium ions want to avoid the hydrogen ions or the protons in the cell wall. So the second process is potassium ions diffuse into the cell. Right? In reality, it's actually to rebalance the positive charges in the cell, but you don't have to mention that. Don't worry about it. But you just have to say potassium ion diffuses into the guard cells through facilitated diffusion. It uses the potassium ion channel. And I told you in the third statement, wherever potassium ion goes, water follows. Okay, you need to explain this a little bit. When potassium ion diffuses or rushes into the cell, it causes the cells to have a higher solute concentration. And remember the relationship about solute concentration and water potential. When solute concentration goes up, water potential goes down. It lowers the water potential. Therefore, it will cause water to also rush into the cell by osmosis, represented by those blue colored dots. And remember, due to water rushing into the cells, the guard cells will try to expand, but due to the uneven thickness of their cell wall, they will increase more in length than diameter, which will cause, you guessed it, what happens? The guard cells to expand and the stomata will open. And the guard cells right now are turgid because they are full of water. That's basically what happens, and that's why I wanted you to memorize the relationship. The hydrogen ions move into the cell wall. Potassium ions hate the hydrogen ions, so they go into the cell in the opposite direction. And water, they also diffuse, they also enter the cells by osmosis due to the lower water potential. Wherever potassium ion goes, water will follow, as you can see there I've highlighted in those 3 diagrams. So, what causes the stoma to close? Remember, right now, the guard cells right now are turgid. They're full of water. So if I want the stoma to close, I have to make the cells flaccid, or the guard cells will need to have lack of water. So the opposite here needs to happen. So again, hydrogen ions and potassium ions hate each other, and wherever potassium ion goes, water follows. So the first thing that happens here is the proton pump is inhibited. Inhibited meaning to say it is blocked. Okay, so will the hydrogen ions be pumped against the concentration gradient? No, it will remain inside the cells. And I told you, hydrogen ions and potassium ions hate each other. So the potassium ions that were earlier in the cell, they are like, ew, I do not want to deal with these hydrogen ions, so therefore they will rush out of the cell by facilitated diffusion. That's what exactly happens. And now the cell wall has a higher solute concentration compared to the cytoplasm. It has a lower water potential outside the cell and a higher water potential inside the cell. So it increases the water potential in the cell. So what happens? Told you, wherever potassium ion goes, water follows. So if the potassium ion went out of the cell into the cell wall, water will also move out of the cell. In this case, through osmosis. And in this situation over here, the guard cells, from its turgid and expanded form, it shrinks and becomes flaccid. And when it becomes flaccid over here, what happens to the stoma? The stoma will close. That's how it works. Right? So this is how the guard cells are. This is how the guard cells open and close their stoma, and you need to know this for the exam. That is why I said, if you can remember water entering the guard cells by osmosis, causing the guard cells to expand and become turgid, stoma opens. I told you that you've already known 40% of it. The rest of the 60% is all about the transport proteins and how they actually carry out this function in detail. Now, in the case of water stress, let's go back. What exactly is water stress, by the way? Water stress is what happens when the plant is subjected to very low humidity and very high temperature. The air is too dry and too hot, and there's not enough water in the soil. In this case, the plant might lose too much water due to transpiration. And if the plant loses too much water due to transpiration, what might happen? The plant cells will, as you can see there, they will die. So in this situation, if the stomata were open, the plants have to immediately close their stomata, because if they don't close their stomata quickly, they might lose too much water in the process and they might die. Okay? So in the situation here, that is where the plant releases the hormone known as abscisic acid, or ABA, in response to water stress. Yes, you may write ABA in the exam. Do not worry about this. ABA is just a plant hormone that has many functions, but for the purpose of homeostasis, it is just the hormone that is released when the plant is subjected to water stress. That means the plant is losing too much water. And if it's losing too much water, what does it have to do? It has to reduce that. that. And how does it reduce that? It has to reduce it by closing the stoma as soon as possible. So when the ABA binds to the receptor, that's the first thing that happens. The proton pump is again inhibited. No protons are moved out. Now, a bit of extra information. If you can put this in the exam, that will be perfect for ABA. This is specifically for ABA. Calcium ions will also enter the cell. Yeah, I know. Look, suddenly I'm introducing new ions. I know it's a bit annoying. Don't blame me for this. But what you can mention in the exam is calcium ions act as a secondary messenger. The ABA was the primary messenger that binds to the receptor, so calcium ions rush into the cell and act as a secondary messenger. And because there's too much positive charges inside the cell, the calcium ions and the hydrogen ions, this will disgust the potassium ions further. The potassium ions inside the cell are like, ew, I don't want to be in this party. And the potassium ions will rush out of the cell as soon as possible, which causes the cell's water potential to increase, and water will also rush out through osmosis. And therefore, the guard cells become flaccid and the stoma will close. The difference here is the stoma closes very, very, very quickly. When ABA is secreted and when it binds to the receptor, the response is much faster. So the stoma closes quickly, and therefore the plants will not lose too much water during the periods of water stress. So this is how ABA, or abscisic acid, actually affects the closing of the stomata during periods of water stress subjected on the plant. That is what we have to know for this part of the chapter. And with that being said, chapter 14, homeostasis, is done. Whew.